Welcome to the Short Term Show, the show about short-term rentals and long-term wealth, with real property owners hosting real properties who are crushing it in the vacation and short-term rental space. And here's your host, Avery Carl.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Short Term Show. Today we have Travis Zappia. He owns 5 different short-term rentals in 3 different markets, and I'm really excited to hear what his experience has been owning in several markets. Travis, how's it going?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for coming. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you found yourself becoming a real estate investor and what you have in your portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name's Travis. I'm 28 years old, currently live in Orlando. I started investing in real estate about 4 years ago now, focused mainly on house hacking to begin with. And how I got started in investing in real estate, I had a friend reach out to me that I was working with, and he mentioned that I needed to, or he recommended that I should read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I wasn't big into reading and told him thanks, but no thanks. I'll politely pass. But he's like, no, man, you really need to read this book, and it'll change your mindset and kind of change how you think about your future and some of the things that you're currently doing and the path that you're on. So I took his word, read the book, and almost immediately realized that everything that I had previously been taught on like getting a steady job and working for somebody else and making sure that you continue to put money into your 401k was okay, but it was the path that many took that it leads to retiring at 65 and then living off of some sort of nest egg at the end. And after reading that book, I realized that at that time I was renting up in Pennsylvania. I had just gotten a promotion to move down to Orlando, and moving down to Orlando, I knew I wanted to purchase a home versus continuing to rent like I was previously. And I bought a home, and within 3 months, I learned about house hacking. I had no intent originally on house hacking and doing anything of that sort, but ended up having a friend move in with me for $500 a month, and then 2 weeks later, he had another friend that moved down for $500 a month, and all of a sudden, I realized the power of house hacking and the power of real estate investing, and continue to grow and expand my knowledge and looking into different strategies, which eventually led me to the short-term rental game, and that's being in Orlando, close to Disney World. It was a great opportunity and a really, really good market to do short-term rentals because it's very short-term rental friendly, and it is a market that has a lot of tourism driven by Disney World and Universal.
Cool. So tell me a little bit about owning in the Orlando market. Is it dependent on Disney? Is there other stuff going on? Are people coming for other things? Tell me a little bit about that.
I would say the tourism market in Orlando and Kissimmee, Davenport area, which is where a lot of the Airbnbs are specifically, and the resorts, is heavily driven around Disney World, Universal, the theme parks. There's also a lot of people that will come to that area, the Kissimmee and Davenport area, who want to stay for a week, and they're going to the parks maybe 1 or 2 days because it's very expensive, so they're typically not there every day while they're in town. But it's also close enough to the beach where you can go East Coast or West Coast and hit some beaches within a short day drive. So a lot of the tourism is driven around Disney, but also the ability to easily get to some of the beaches that are, if people want to come down to Florida and also go to the beach while they're staying near all the theme parks. But it is heavily driven around Disney World, the theme parks, and Universal Studios as well.
Okay. And you have properties in 2 other markets that are more what I would call like a true vacation rental market, because not that Orlando isn't that, but there is actually jobs and is other oh my God, there are jobs and other industries there besides tourism. So can you tell us what other two markets for the listeners you own in? And can you kind of compare and contrast owning like in the Smokies versus Orlando?
Absolutely. So the two other markets that, so I own in two cabins in the Smoky Mountains, and then I manage for a friend's family in Panama City Beach. And it is definitely a very different feel as far as who's coming and especially with things like COVID when that happened last year, what happened to the industry as a whole. And I would say PCB and Panama City Beach, PCB and the Smoky Mountains are very much drive-to destinations, while Orlando is very much the majority of people are flying in and going through the airports and traveling that way. So in the sense of just the destination as a whole and what it attracts from how people get there, there are markets that are very, very different. I mean, I could tell that last year just from COVID when it hit, all the parks shut down. And all of a sudden, having to pivot the business model for the Orlando properties to something that was more of 30+ day rentals versus looking at markets like the Smoky Mountains and PCB, where people were still coming because you can go outdoors and there were still a lot of things to do outdoors, and people would drive to the destination versus a lot of fear last year with COVID and individuals not wanting to necessarily get on planes to travel.
I kind of wondered about that. So you're saying that you had to pivot to 30+ day rentals. I think a lot of people don't have a pivot plan, or they aren't necessarily equipped for a pivot. Can you tell us like how you came to deciding to do it that way, or just waiting it out? What steps led you to making that decision?
It was actually interesting because I had to pivot in Orlando because there was an executive order put in place that would essentially was stopping short-term rentals entirely, and it was strange about how the executive order read because it was very unclear. But more or less, what ended up happening was hotels could still stay open for first responders and people that worked in the nursing and medical industry, so that they can travel in and help with help at the hospitals if help was needed. But for whatever reason, short-term rentals were you were no longer able to rent out your property as a true short-term rental, which for me, I would consider a true short-term rental being anywhere typically between 2 and 7 night stays. So I had to pivot the business model because in the executive order it read 30+ day rentals were allowed and were okay, and the county made it clear that like, hey, this is not allowed. It actually put me in a couple unique situations as well. One in particular where I ended up getting in a lawsuit with one of my HOAs because I had somebody who's going to rent there for 60 nights, which I understood as being okay based off of the executive order. But ended up that the HOA didn't allow the guest into the resort, and followed with a major lawsuit and everything. But the main pivot and the main reason for the pivot was due to the executive order that was put into place. And essentially from reading that executive order, I was trying to figure out, as any business owner should, if your business all of a sudden gets shut down, you got to figure out how do you pivot so that you can still continue to drive revenue during very uncertain times.
Absolutely. That's super important. And let's back up a little bit and talk about choosing your market. So you chose Orlando because you live there and you knew it. As you expanded outside of Orlando, how did you choose that market, and how will you choose your next market if you're planning on getting into other ones?
Yeah, so a lot of it is continuing to talk to other individuals who are in the management space of short-term rentals and truly understanding from them how things are going, what the market looks like, what tourism in that area looks like, understanding what drives people to go to that area. So very similar to the point that you had earlier about the difference between Orlando and the Smoky Mountains at Panama City Beach. That's an area there's a different type of traveler who travels to those destinations, mainly around like during COVID times. The drive-to destinations were a big hit because people wanted to vacation, they wanted to still do things, but they didn't feel comfortable getting on planes and actually traveling and flying through, going through airports. So I think it's really understanding what the market looks like historically. What has the market looked like? Is it something that is a brand new up and coming area where potentially it's higher risk, where there's not a tried and true understanding of more or less like, is this market are people gonna want to continue to come to this market and travel here, or is it something that is like potentially going to be gone in 3 or 4 years based off of COVID, like COVID being the main driver of that market being hot. So I think really understanding historical performance of an area and like how many tourists that it brings in on a yearly basis is extremely important. And also the numbers have to work. So for every market right now seems really, really hot from a real estate standpoint. Prices that probably a lot of people never thought they would see, but the numbers ultimately have to work. And historically, from the analysis that I do and what numbers I'm looking for on my properties is for the cash on cash return to be over 20%. So most of my properties are around 25 to 35% cash on cash return. And that's what I'm really looking to outside of the data around tourism and what brings people to town, really making sure that the numbers at least hit that mark.
Awesome. And I think that's really important to look at pre-COVID numbers because COVID did cause a boom in a lot of different short-term rental markets. And I tell my clients, I send them the 2019 data and the 2018 data a lot of times. And they're like, well, I want 2020. I want to see what last year did. I'm like, okay, I will send this to you, but just know that that's not a normal year. It could be the new normal, and that'd be great if it was, because the 2020 numbers are really, really high. But it's really important to look further back than just last year because it was not a normal year. So that's really good advice.
Absolutely.
So you moved to Orlando, you kind of got a taste of real estate investing through house hacking. So what made you jump from house hacking and choose short-term rentals rather than a more traditional long-term rental or a multifamily?
Yeah, a lot of the reasons why. So I guess there was a couple of reasons. The first one was I knew I wanted to get into the rental space where it wasn't a house hack and it was actually an investment property that was a fully rented unit, whether that was long term or short term. The more I continued to look into, okay, what would make sense? What markets would I feel comfortable going to? If I were going to make the jump into purchasing something that was dedicated to be an investment property, what I started to notice as I continued to analyze different strategies and different markets was the number of short-term rental properties that you would need to be able to be financially independent was significantly less than the number of long-term rental units that you need to have typically, because from at least my experience, short-term rentals are cash flowing 3 to 5 times more per month than long-term rentals. And once I started to understand what the numbers looked like and really aligning that to my goals of being financially independent, what I found and continued to do research on was, okay, well, if the numbers are cash flowing this much more, how much more work is it? Is it work that I can do myself, or is it work that I need to hire out? And I really started to look into how do you set your management, how do you set up the management side of things so that the overall time investment isn't significant enough where you're more or less replacing your current job with another job. So I started to do a lot of research into what tools are out there, how are people managing multiple properties, 10, 15, 20 units at a time. What systems and processes do they have in place? And I started to kind of piece together things that I liked from what I was hearing from different individuals. And from that, figured out that like, hey, short-term rentals is the area that I wanna be in and I want to invest in. And another reason why I think I made that decision was living in Orlando, Kissimmee and Davenport historically have been two of the top 10 cities from a short-term rental standpoint that have a significant amount of short-term rental operators, properties, and tourism due to Disney and Universal and the different things that bring people to the area. So it was nice that I was going to be living close to somewhere, especially for the first true short-term rental property that is dedicated just to short-term rentals. So I can go to the property, set up the property physically, interact with guests if I needed to. So a lot of the worries that many have when they go and look at investing in their first investment property, I was going to be close enough to the property, about 30 minutes away, where if something happened, I can go to the property myself and figure out what's going on. And I think that kind of eased my worry a little bit into jumping in, knowing that I can drive to the property if I needed to.
That's definitely a limiting belief of a lot of real estate investors that you actually didn't have to deal with on your first one, that they feel like they can't invest somewhere that they don't live, but you actually are one of the very few people who is able to live next door to a really good place, a really good market for short-term rentals. So you definitely got to kind of dip your toe in and figure it out locally before having to just jump straight into investing long distance like a lot of people do. When you did start investing long distance, what were some of the differences and challenges that you faced compared to investing in a short-term rental that was just 30 minutes away?
I think once I invested in a property that was a distance away, it really helped me get my stuff together and really forced me to think about how do I need to make sure the property is set up so that I can manage this from a distance. So it really made me become self-reflective on why I like understanding when I was going to my property in Kissimmee, why was I going to that property? What was I doing at that property? And how do I try to set up properties that are out of state or more than 30-minute driving distance away that I don't want to go to or I'm not going to be able to go to consistently? How do I try to set up my teams on site there in place so that I don't have to worry about the things that I'm currently doing? So it actually really allowed me to take a step back, understand why am I going to the properties when I am going to the properties, and then work to set up systems in place so I don't have to make those trips. I can coordinate with my cleaners and my maintenance crews to make sure that they're able to complete certain tasks that I was normally doing to save money at my Orlando property. Because I wasn't going to have the option of going there and being close to the property. So I think investing out of state, out of a market that I can drive to on a day-to-day basis if I need to, really allowed me to take my management side of things to the next level and helped me work to understand how to set up properties so that you can manage from a distance and then have the team on site or like physically in the area to be able to coordinate with when you need certain things done.
Absolutely. That team on the ground locally is 100%. Actually, your cleaner is the most important person in your entire team. And a lot of short-term rental investors kind of make the mistake of micromanaging their cleaner to start out and not really realizing that if you just find a good cleaner and let them do their job, that you're going to be a lot more successful than micromanaging them. So finding that team locally, starting with the cleaner, really is like the number one ingredient for your success as a short-term rental investor.
Is 100% true.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people too, when it comes to managing remotely, they want to have some way of knowing how their cleaner is performing. So do you just kind of let your guests tell you that, or do you have somebody that goes in maybe once a month and spot checks your cleaner?
I'll have my maintenance guy come behind my cleaners every once in a while. But one of the things that I've speaking to the point of like, hey, you gotta get a really good cleaning crew and you gotta trust them. I don't want my cleaners to necessarily feel like they have somebody coming behind and constantly checking like, there's certain standards and things that I expect of my cleaners and for the money that I'm paying for them to turn the properties. And I don't want them to feel like there's somebody that's constantly going to come behind and nitpick things. I'll always try to get feedback from guests and make sure that the place was clean. And if they have any additional feedback or things that could improve, that I get that feedback and then relay it to my cleaning teams. But at the same time, no matter how many properties you have or how few properties you have, you're always going to have guests that are going to complain about certain things. You got to understand that, like, hey, your cleaners are going to make mistakes. No matter how good your cleaners are, they're going to miss things here and there. And you can't take it personally if a guest reaches out and says, hey, this isn't clean, or like there's a small stain on a towel or sheets or whatever. Like, that's going to happen. And there's no reason to beat up your cleaners about that, especially if you have a really, really good cleaning crew. Like, they're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. You're not going to be able to please every single guest, but I will occasionally have my maintenance guy go behind my cleaners and just kind of make sure that everything looks good. But the majority of the feedback that I try to get is from guests who are staying there, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are really using the entire property and seeing everything that the cleaners are dealing with and doing day in and day out.
Totally. I'm a big fan of just letting the guests review. Every now and then we'll say, like, to a guest, hey, we got a new cleaner, even if we didn't, and say, hey, we got a new cleaner. Would you mind letting us know, how they did? And the guests are happy to do that a lot of times. So I agree in not making the cleaners feel micromanaged or feel like you're sending people to check their work. If you let them do their job and make them want to do a good job for you and like working with you, you're gonna get a much better result than micromanaging them to death and making them dread every time they have a text or a phone call from you. So let's talk a little bit about financing. How are you financing these things?
Yeah, so I have purchased all of my properties. So the Orlando properties, I have used 20% down conventional loans, just the normal route that most individuals go down if they're investing in properties. For the Smoky Mountains, and I guess let me maybe take a step back. The Orlando properties, because I still live close enough to the property, I can't classify one of them as a vacation rental or like a vacation home for me. So that required the 20% down normal conventional route without paying PMI and all those things. For the Smoky Mountain properties, one of them I did a 10% down vacation home loan because it is far enough away from my personal residence that it can be considered a vacation home. Only downside of that is you have to pay PMI, but I'm more than happy to pay PMI to not have to come to the closing table with another $50,000 cash. So I think a lot of times people get stuck on not wanting to pay PMI, and when I ask them why, they're like, PMI is bad. I'm like, well, how long will it take you to be able to save another $50,000? And somebody says, oh, it's going to take me another 5 years. I'm like, well, how about pay $200 a month extra or whatever the PMI might be based off how expensive the property is, so that you can buy it now versus waiting another 5 years. So I don't have any issues paying PMI and putting less than 20% down if there are vehicles to do it. And the vacation home loan was for one of the cabins that I closed on in the Smokies. And then the second one was a 15% down conventional loan. That I'm still paying PMI for. But my thought right now on both of those properties has been based off how hot the market is there. If the properties and the property values continue to appreciate as fast as they're appreciating, my plan is to go in and maybe after 6 months or a year, just go have it have the cabins reassessed and see where the loan to value at that point might be, and see if the PMI can get removed. So. And that's something that will cost $100 to $300 depending on how expensive of a appraisal you want to get. But in markets where the property values are continuing to appreciate as much as they are, I have no issues putting 10% down. If I could do a 10% down vacation loan or 15% down conventional, and then trying to wait 6 months to a year to potentially get a reassessment and get that PMI removed.
I think a lot of investors don't realize that that some banks can do a 15% down investment loan. A lot of people are under the impression even that it has to be 25%, which it does have to be 25% if it's a multi-unit, but a lot of people don't realize that you can get under 20% on a conventional investment loan. So I think that's a really, really good tool, and that not enough people know about or even ask about or utilize it. So
you say that because when I posted that on my Instagram account the other day, and I had so many people reach out and say, how did you get a 15% down conventional? It's like, what lender do you have? I don't have a lender. I'm like, lenders can give a 15% down conventional loan, but people, to your point, people just don't realize that that's out there, and you can do that.
Yeah, they just assume that it has to be a minimum of 20. And Travis, we are coming to the last 3 questions of the show. So the first one is, what advice would you give 20-year-old Travis if you knew then what you know now? Which is not that long ago, because you're, what, 28?
Yeah, 28. I would say I wish I would have house hacked earlier. I wish I would have house hacked straight out of college. It's too often that people get stuck into this mindset of focusing on the wrong things, especially in investments and saving money and savings percentages and those kind of things. And what I'm amazed at, and what my 20-year-old self didn't realize, is I was focusing on saving on the wrong things, on the small expenses that really don't push the needle that much into saving a lot of money and investing. And if you are to simply house hack, especially when you're young, if you're still okay with having roommates and do rent by the bedroom or buy a small multi and rent out entire units, you can significantly accelerate your path to financial independence. So knowing what I know now, I wish I would have started house hacking at 21 years old, straight out of college, and after I started my full-time career.
That is really great advice. So along those same lines, what advice would you give a new investor who is interested in getting into real estate investing in today's market?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is focusing on education. I think educating yourself and understanding, reading books, listening to podcasts, continuing to network with people that are actually doing it, I think is really, really important. But to take it one step further, I feel like too often, especially people that are new to this and want to get into it, too often people are just focused on education and don't focus on taking action. And there's way too many people that are out there that say, hey, I read 100 books this year. I'm like, okay, that's awesome, but what did you do? Because reading 100 books is great, and maybe you learned some stuff, but like, how did you apply what you read and actually take action to get wherever your goals are and wherever you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road? And I think too often people who are new to investing in real estate and that kind of thing, they focus too much on just educating. At some point, you gotta take the leap of faith. And at the end of the day, what most newbies, one of the big mistakes that they make is they think that the first deal has to be a home run. The point of the first deal is you get started and you start learning. You don't have to have a home run. You can even lose some money and take a lot of those learnings into the second deal, third deal, fourth deal. But just educating yourself for years and listening and never taking action, you're never going to learn what you need to learn to actually get to where you want to go. So I think educating yourself is important. You don't want to make dumb decisions because you didn't take the time to understand what's going on in the market, what's your strategy, who are other people in the area or in that space that are doing the same thing. But you have to take action because that's the only way that you're really going to learn what to do. And just don't focus on the first deal being a home run. That's not the point. The first deal is meant to get you into the game and get you to start learning about what you need to know for the second deal, what you need to know for the third deal, and continuing down that path.
Really, really great advice. And along the lines of education, what is your favorite book or a book that you just read recently that's impacted your mindset?
Yeah, I have two books that I really, really like that I go back to often. The first one is The One Thing by Gary Keller. I think that it's too often the thing that I like about that book in particular is it's very simplistic as far as just a mindset shift, what to think about, how to focus and really take action and get things done. And he breaks it down in a very, very easy way for people to digest. And honestly, it's something that you can read in a day and be able to take in a lot of really, really good information. So that's a really good mindset book. The other one that I really, really like is Set for Life by Scott Trench. And the main reason I like that book is because he talks about focusing on the right things. So something I was talking about earlier, where a lot of times people are focusing on the wrong things. Generally speaking, they're focusing on saving on that $5 cup of coffee that they buy every single morning. I'm like, that's great. Like if you don't, if like you want to cut that expense, that's fine. But that's $150 a month that you're saving. But like if you eliminated your housing expense, that's $1,000, $1,500 a month by just doing something that actually makes a difference. And a lot of times people are focusing on the wrong things, where they're trying to eliminate things that bring them happiness. A lot of people really like a $5 cup of coffee in the morning from Starbucks or Dunkin' or whatever, and that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But if you focus on eliminating the big expenses like housing, transportation, and food and entertainment, if you focus on eliminating the things that are really, really big, then you're going to exponentially increase your how fast it's going to take, or how long it's going to take you to reach financial independence or whatever your goal is.
Those are both. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And if any of our listeners found you inspirational, want to find you, how can they reach out to you?
The way to reach out to me is on Instagram. So my Instagram account is at the Young Retiree by 33. The number's 33.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for coming on, Travis, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.